That persistent ringing in your ears, tinnitus, we always blame it on that one loud concert from years ago, right? But what if the real culprit is hiding somewhere a lot deeper, like in your DNA? Today, we're going on a hunt for the genetic clues behind that phantom sound. So let's get right to it. Is that phantom sound just a result of your life's experiences? Or could it actually be an echo from your ancestors? That's the big question we're tackling. Are some of us just predisposed to this condition from the day we're born?
So, first things first, where do we even start looking for the evidence? Is there really a sound, a ringing, hiding somewhere in our DNA?
Okay, let's make sure we're on the same page. Simply put, genetics is the study of all the traits passed down through your family tree. It's basically the instruction manual for you, written in your DNA. And since we already know that a ton of hearing issues are genetic, it's a totally fair question to ask, is tinnitus one of them? Now, just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about here, out of all our 22,000 genes, nearly 3,000 of them are linked to how we communicate. That includes our incredibly complex hearing system. So right off the bat, that's a huge number of potential suspects for a condition like tinnitus. So with all those potential suspects, how do we find our first real clue? Well, scientists turn to a classic and frankly brilliant tool for untangling nature versus nurture: twin studies. Here's how it works, and it's pretty clever. Identical twins share 100% of their DNA, while fraternal twins, well, they share about 50%, just like any other siblings. So if a trait shows up way more often in both identical twins than it does in fraternal twins, that's a really strong signal that genes are playing a major role. And here it is, the smoking gun. Study after study shows that identical twins are far more likely to both have tinnitus than fraternal twins are. In fact, some of the best research we have suggests that about 40% of your risk for developing tinnitus comes directly from your genes. That is not a small number, folks. That's a huge genetic link. All right, so now that we know for sure there's a genetic link, the real hunt begins. It's time to identify our specific suspects. Which genes are actually involved? The first method scientists used was something called the candidate gene approach. You can think of this like a police detective who starts an investigation by questioning all the usual suspects. Scientists focused on genes they already knew were involved in things like hearing, nerve growth, and brain function. So they investigated all sorts of genes, ones involved in everything from how our brain cells talk to each other to how our bodies handle stress and inflammation. And yeah, they found some intriguing leads for sure, but the results? They were kind of inconsistent and hard to replicate. It was pretty clear this wasn't going to be a simple case with just one or two obvious culprits. So that initial search for the usual suspects, it didn't crack the case. It was time to bring in the big guns, the high-tech tools, and scan the entire genetic crime scene. This brings us to something called genome-wide association studies, or GWAS for short, and you can honestly think of this as a massive high-tech search party. These studies scan the complete DNA of tens of thousands of people, comparing those with tinnitus to those without, all to hunt for these tiny little genetic variations that might be more common in the tinnitus group. And this is where we get some real concrete breakthroughs. These GWAS studies started to pinpoint specific genes like GPM6A, PSAFP, and TNRC6. But what's really fascinating is that these genetic signals weren't just random. They were most active in parts of the brain that are deeply tied to memory and sensory processing, like the hippocampus and the cortex. But hold on, because here's the biggest plot twist of them all. These studies found a shared genetic link between tinnitus and conditions like anxiety and depression. This is a total game changer. It suggests that the distress you feel and the sound you hear from tinnitus are actually intertwined at a deep biological level. This tells us tinnitus isn't just an ear problem, it's a brain problem with profound genetic roots. So we found our genetic suspects. We've got them lined up. But the case isn't closed, not by a long shot. It turns out this mystery is even more nuanced than we thought. It's not just about the genes you have, but how those genes behave. This leads us to a really fascinating question. If your DNA is the blueprint for your body, who's the contractor? Who decides which parts of the blueprint actually get used and when they get used? Well, the answer to that lies in this incredible field called epigenetics.
So, epigenetics, it doesn't change your actual DNA sequence. What it does is change how your body reads that sequence. Your lifestyle, your environment, your experiences, all these things leave these little chemical marks or fingerprints on your DNA. And these marks, they act like dimmer switches, turning certain genes up or turning them way down.
Okay, so let's walk through how the actual experience of tinnitus can change the way your genes work. That constant sound can cause chronic stress, right? Well, that stress puts your body's emergency response system on high alert all the time. This, in turn, can lead to these epigenetic changes, like something called DNA methylation, which is kind of like putting a do not read sign on certain genes. This can actually mess with your body's ability to handle stress. It becomes this vicious cycle. The tinnitus causes stress, and that stress then physically changes how your genes work, making it even harder for you to cope. Okay, let's wrap up our investigation. We followed the clues all the way from twin studies to the entire human genome and even beyond that. So what does all this mean for the future of that buzz? So what's the final verdict? What have we actually learned? Well, we know tinnitus is not a simple case. We know for sure it's heritable. We have actual genetic suspects identified. We know our environment and experiences can literally change how those genes work. And maybe most importantly, we know tinnitus isn't just one thing. It's a super complex interaction between your genetic vulnerability and everything you experience in life, like noise exposure. And this right here is why solving this genetic mystery matters so much. By understanding the specific genes and the specific pathways involved in different types of tinnitus, we can finally move beyond these one-size-fits-all treatments that don't work for everyone. The goal is personalized medicine, developing therapies that are targeted directly to an individual's unique genetic profile. Which leaves us with one final and pretty tantalizing thought. We've learned that tinnitus is, at least in part, a story that's written in our DNA and then edited by our life experiences. So the ultimate question for the future is, if we can finally read that story, can we one day learn how to give it a quieter ending?